In just one bold move, 3 African nations have done what many thought impossible. They've challenged the United Nations, turned their backs on ECOWAS, and announced a new era of African independence. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. Together, they are the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES, and they're rewriting the rules of power on the African continent. This isn't just another political story. This is a revolution in real time. A revolution that could decide the future of Africa's borders, its economy, and its sovereignty. And it's happening faster than anyone imagined. Stay with me because by the end of this video, you will see why the AES is the biggest geopolitical shockwave Africa has seen in decades, and why the entire world is now watching. The story begins with instability. Years of insurgencies, foreign military interventions, and economic sanctions had left Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso trapped in a cycle of dependence on outside powers. ECOWAS sanctions tightened, and the United Nations offered words but little action. But then change. Military-led governments rose in all 3 nations, promising security, sovereignty, and a complete break from the old ways. And in September 2023, they signed a mutual defense pact, the Alliance of Sahel States, vowing to defend each other against any threat, internal or external. For many in the Sahel, it was more than a treaty. It was a declaration. Africa will stand on its own 2 feet. Earlier this year, the AES made its most controversial move yet, announcing a complete withdrawal from ECOWAS. No more ECOWAS laws. No more ECOWAS currency dependence. No more open borders to forces they believe undermine their security. And now, tensions with the United Nations are rising. The AES has accused the UN of failing to protect civilians, of ignoring African voices, and of keeping the Sahel dependent on international aid instead of fostering true self-reliance. In their place, the AES is turning to alternative partners, building stronger ties with Russia, Turkey, and other nations outside the traditional Western sphere. The AES isn't just about defense. It's about creating a completely new African framework, one that other nations might join. Their goals are ambitious. A joint military force with advanced drone capabilities, a shared currency to escape the CFA franc, an AES passport for free movement between member states, and a development bank funded by African resources, not foreign loans. It's Pan-Africanism in action, not in speeches, not in dreams, but in signed agreements and deployed soldiers. Of course, this seismic shift hasn't gone unnoticed. ECOWAS leaders are warning of fragmentation in West Africa. The UN is urging dialogue, but is clearly uneasy about the AES forging its own path. Meanwhile, global powers are watching closely. The West fears losing influence. Other African nations are quietly considering, should we join them? Could this be the start of a continental wave that redefines Africa's future? The Alliance of Sahel States is young, untested, and surrounded by challenges. But one thing is certain. They've already changed the conversation about who holds power in Africa. If their vision succeeds, Africa could enter a new era, one where decisions are made in Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou, not in New York, Paris, or Brussels. The question is, will the rest of Africa join them? This is not the end of the story, it's just the beginning. And if you want to see where this revolution leads, make sure you stay with us. Because history is unfolding, and Africa is on the move.
Audio Jungle.
The Sahel just changed the game. The Alliance of Sahel States, also known as the AES, is a powerful new bloc of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. These 3 countries are challenging the authority of the United Nations, the African Union, and most importantly, the Economic Community of West African States, otherwise known as ECOWAS. And they're doing this by creating their own institutions to rival those of ECOWAS. In fact, these Sahel nations are not just building their own army, but they're also creating their own currency, their own passports, and even their own development bank to defy both international sanctions and the threat of military intervention from ECOWAS and France. What is even more shocking is that this move is being made with the knowledge and consent of Russia, which has significant interests in all three countries. So it is no surprise that the UN has called for a drastic change in approach to dealing with the Sahel region. But what does this mean for the future of regional power in Africa? Let's find out in today's episode of Geopolitics in Africa. Welcome to the show. Today, we're going to look at the recent developments in the Sahel region and how the new alliance between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso is challenging the status quo. We will analyze how the Sahel states are taking steps to become less dependent on the West and more self-reliant by creating their own regional organizations. Additionally, we will discuss the implications of these actions for the future of regional integration in Africa and the continent's relationship with the West. Let's start by looking at the current situation in the Sahel region. As we have discussed several times before, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have faced a number of challenges in recent years, including ongoing conflicts with extremist groups, economic instability, and a perceived lack of support from Western partners. This has led to a growing sense of disillusionment with the West among the populations of these countries and a desire to explore alternative partnerships, especially with Russia. In response to these challenges, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have formed a new alliance, the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES, with the stated aim of promoting peace, security, and development in the region. However, many observers believe that the alliance is also a way for these countries to counterbalance the influence of ECOWAS, the regional organization that has been trying to mediate the crisis in Mali since the military coup of 2020. One of the key areas where the Sahelian states are looking to assert their independence from ECOWAS in the area of security. The three countries have announced plans to create a joint military force, the Sahel Joint Force, which will be made up of troops from each country. This force is intended to replace the G5 Sahel Force, which has been criticized for its inability to contain the spread of extremism in the region. Importantly, while the G5 Sahel was led by France and included troops from across the Sahel, the new force will only include troops from the three member states of the AES. This move is seen as an attempt to reduce the Sahel's dependence on foreign military support and to create a more effective force to combat insecurity. Another area where the Sahel states are seeking to chart their own path is in the area of regional integration. The three countries have agreed to launch a common currency, the ECO, as part of a wider project to create a single market for goods and services across the region. They have also agreed to harmonize their monetary policies and to establish a common central bank. While the use of the ECO currency is currently limited to these three countries, the long-term goal is for it to replace the CFA franc, which is currently used by 14 countries in West and Central Africa. To further strengthen their ties, the Sahel states have also agreed to issue joint passports to their citizens, which will allow for easier movement across borders within the region. They have also established a joint airline, the Air Sahel, which will connect the three countries and facilitate travel and trade. These measures are aimed at creating a more integrated regional market and reducing the barriers to trade and investment. It should also be noted that the Sahel states are taking steps to reduce their dependence on foreign financial institutions by establishing their own development bank, the Sahel Bank. The bank will provide funding for infrastructure projects and other initiatives aimed at promoting economic growth and development in the region. One of the key differences between the Sahel Bank and other regional banks, such as the African Development Bank, is that the Sahel Bank is focused exclusively on the three Sahel states and is not open to countries outside of the alliance. This reflects the desire of the Sahel states to prioritize their own interests and to avoid being overshadowed by larger, more powerful African countries. So, what explains the decision of these three countries to take such drastic measures? Why are they risking the possibility of economic sanctions and other forms of isolation by breaking away from ECOWAS and the West? One key factor driving this decision is a growing sense of frustration with what is perceived as a lack of support from Western partners. For example, in Mali, there is a feeling that France has not done enough to help the country address its security challenges, despite being a former colonial power and continuing military presence. Similarly, in Burkina Faso and Niger, there is a perception that Western-backed institutions, such as ECOWAS and the African Union, have been too quick to condemn the military coups that brought the current leaders to power, despite the fact that these coups were in part a response to the perceived failures of civilian governments to address security and development challenges. Another factor driving the decision of the Sahel states to pursue closer ties with Russia is the perceived hypocrisy of the West in dealing with security issues. There is a feeling that the West is willing to tolerate or even support military coups in countries that serve its strategic interests, such as Egypt and Sudan, while at the same time condemning and sanctioning those in the Sahel. This double standard is seen as unfair and hypocritical and has contributed to a growing sense of disillusionment with the West among the populations of these countries. Moreover, there is a perception in the Sahel that the West is more interested in exploiting the region's resources than in helping to address its problems. The Sahel is rich in natural resources, including gold, oil, and uranium, and Western companies are major players in the mining and other extractive industries in the region. This has led to a perception that the West is only interested in the Sahel to the extent that it can serve its own economic interests. While the Sahel states have taken some steps to mitigate the potential negative impacts of sanctions, such as by diversifying their trade partners and seeking support from other countries, it is possible that sanctions could still have a significant impact on their economies. Sanctions can lead to higher prices for imports, which can contribute to inflation and make it more expensive for consumers to purchase goods and services. Sanctions can also lead to a decrease in foreign investment, which can make it more difficult for businesses to raise capital and expand their operations. In response to these challenges, the Sahel states have been seeking closer ties with countries that are not aligned with the West, such as Russia, China, and Turkey. These countries have offered support in various forms, including military, economic, and diplomatic. For example, Russia has provided military assistance to Mali and the Central African Republic, while China has invested in infrastructure projects in both Mali and Burkina Faso. Despite the challenges and uncertainties, the Sahel states seem determined to pursue their own path to peace, security, and development. The creation of the AES and its associated institutions represents a significant step towards this goal. Only time will tell whether this bold experiment will succeed or fail, but one thing is for sure: the status quo in the Sahel region is unlikely to continue, and the coming years are likely to be a pivotal moment in the history of the region and for Africa as a whole. This bold experiment is being closely watched by the rest of Africa and the world. It could either set a dangerous precedent for coups and instability or become a model for self-reliance and independence from the West. If the Sahel experiment succeeds, it could inspire other regions in Africa to pursue similar paths, potentially leading to a more multipolar and less Western-dominated continent. On the other hand, if the Sahel experiment fails, it could reinforce the current regional order and the dominance of Western powers in Africa. Ultimately, the outcome of this experiment will depend on a complex interplay of factors, including the ability of the Sahel states to manage their internal affairs, their success in attracting investment and support from non-Western partners, and their ability to navigate the complex geopolitical dynamics of the region. Only time will tell which path Africa's Sahel will take. But one thing is clear: the status quo is over and the Sahel is poised to play a pivotal role in shaping the future of the continent. What do you think about the bold steps taken by the Sahel states? Will they succeed in creating a more independent and self-reliant region, or will they face the same challenges as other African countries that have tried to go down this path? Share your thoughts below. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to our channel for daily updates on African news. Be sure to like this video and share it with your friends. Stay tuned for more insightful content on African geopolitics.
Disclaimer: the content of this video is based on credible, publicly available information and is intended for educational, analytical, and informational purposes only. African Spotlight 24 does not promote hate, violence, misinformation, or political unrest. Our goal is to deliver thoughtful insights, highlight local voices, and encourage informed conversations throughout Africa.